I've been following the conversation around unemployed teachers, which, in my view, is an issue that deals with unemployment in general, and then which is also an economic issue. Of course, it can also be a political issue, it can also be a societal issue as well. But then, when it comes to employment from an economic, point of view, is that there are three documents that many of us at times we ignore a lot that determine whether or not we are going to create jobs. Okay? It doesn't matter in whatever economic system it is, but then at least those three documents, if you read them properly, they would be able to inform you whether the economic situation and environment will allow job opportunities to be created. And those documents are your country's fiscal policy, they are your country's monetary policy, and then they are the budget. And these documents are very important because they many times function in a financial year, and then depending on another financial year you can always amend them to to fit in that economic environment where you want to implement them. So now what the fiscal policy does, which seem to be the highest document, of course the issue of what economic system you are using is not, I don't want to put it in now, but I can put it in later. So now the issue of the fiscal policy is that it details how the government is going to collect taxes. It details how the government is going to manage taxes. It also details how the government is going to, spend its money in that particular type of a year, as well as how the government is going to borrow money. So such information is well detailed in the country's national fiscal policy. Okay, and then now from that fiscal policy that you develop, you then draw out the country's monetary policy. And the monetary policy in many cases, it just deals with money in that particular economy. And then in a lot of countries, the custodian of that policy is the central bank. Like in the Namibian context, it could be the Bank of Namibia. So what this policy does is that it deals with how do we inject money into the economy, and what are the interest rate when we are going to borrow, taxes and all of that. They are also well dealt with in the monetary policy. So now when you want to implement your monetary policy and your fiscal policy, you then do so through your budget, like your national budget. And then now that will determine whether there will be jobs created or not. Of course, there must be a long-term plan, like okay, in the Namibian context, sometimes we had Vision 2030, and then we also have these NDPs, the National Development Plan. You then look into your NDPs, what is there, and then you develop all these documents. So now, but in a given financial year, with these three documents, then you can tell whether or not you can create jobs. Of course, you can hear people saying we are going to build how many stadiums, we are going to create how many jobs, we are going to build how many houses and all of that. But then if you want to confirm whether or not such is doable or it will actually happen or to be implemented, you ought to go and read those three documents, which is now your fiscal policy, your monetary policy, as well as your budget. If nothing in those documents reflect that yes, indeed, you can create the number of jobs people are talking about, you can build houses that people are talking about, stadiums that people are talking about, such will be reflected in those documents. You must be able to see that yes, this fiscal policy give provision or room for that. This monetary policy could allow that. This budget speaks to that. If not, then those things just remain, political documents. So it's very important that we read those three documents. So now, the issue of unemployment in Namibia is that as years goes, then unemployment just increase, So the rate of unemployment in 2020 was a little bit lower compared to now. So meaning every time it keeps on increasing. So now, and the only way we can curb or deal with that is through those instruments of your fiscal policy or monetary policy, as well as your budget. Those are the instruments that you can use in order for you to deal with the issue of unemployment from the economic point of view. So now, you can even take the most extreme, capitalist countries and societies like your United States of America, your Britain, and all of that. For instance, in 1929 to 1930 there, when there was that what we call Great Depression. So now the governments in those countries had to intervene in order for them to ensure that at least the economy recovers. And then the government had to intervene, and you would see how in their fiscal policy, how in their monetary policy, and how in their budget, they are actually intervening to ensure that the economy is running and functioning properly. And then it's very important for us also to note that the private sector can never ever contribute in the economy that they don't have confidence in. They first need to have confidence, and they must that they are going to recover their money, make profit and all of that in order for them to contribute. If they don't, then they just keep their money in the banks and all of that. That's why after the Great Depression, it was only when the private sector and the finance sector was now confident enough that yes, the economy is okay for them to invest, then they started. Then of course in 1939, when the Second World War, break out again, things went bad again for the economy. And then in 1945, that was now after the Second World War, when again the economy was, now people are trying to recover from the impact and effects of the Second World War. Again, the private sector and the financial sector was not interested in taking part in the economy. It was actually the state, through their fiscal policy, through their monetary policy, through their budget, they intervened to ensure that they recover the economy. And then confidence was built, and then later on, the private sector came in to play a role in that particular economy. The same thing happened in 2008 when there was that financial crisis. So a lot of governments had to intervene in the economy in order for them to ensure that the economy is quite okay for economical activities to happen. So now, if you read especially the Namibian fiscal policy, our monetary policy and our budget, definitely you don't see anything that seems to suggest that we are really serious about the issue of employment. You don't see anything that seems to suggest that we are very serious about the economy. So everything that you see there is just, words. The indications there are just that we are never gonna go anywhere. Sometimes you find some areas of austerity. Sometimes you find areas where the state want to leave things to the private sector. So there's no a coherent, approach in our fiscal policy, monetary policy, as well as budget that seems to strengthen at least key economic sectors and deal with key economic issues like employment. Like you don't see that, because remember before this Great Depression of 1930 is that there were this classical economical understanding that the state should never play any role in the economy. Until I think there was a famous guy, if I'm not mistaken, it's John Keynes. Then he came up with a general theory that deals with the economy, and that is where a lot of even modern fiscal policies, their format and content and background is actually backed by the arguments of John Keynes, who then begin to drive an argument that in order for you to run an economy, so you need to sort of, the state should play a role of regulating that particular economy. And then the way the state regulate is now done through those three documents I was talking about, especially the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. So now those things can affect the amount of money available. They can also affect, the demand. They can also, affect capital available, because we have people who are, who want to venture in business, for instance, but is there funding available for you to do that? There are people who want to do this and that, but is that particular service in demand in terms of the economy? So all these things, they are largely affected by the fiscal policy as well as the monetary, policy. Of course, last time I checked, I think these fiscal policies, they are somehow in three categories, depending on which one you want to pick. Because there is an expansionary one, where now the government increase its spending and then cut on taxes in order to stimulate the economy. By so doing, sometimes there will be money available for people who want to engage into businesses, innovation and other things. And then people are not paying a lot of taxes. Therefore, you leave money in the pockets of individuals. And then when you leave money in the pockets of individuals, these individuals are able to, support the economy, even the government, like things like water, electricity, all those things. People can only afford if they have money in their own pocket, because taxes are somehow well managed, that they are not, too high. That is now the expansionary approach to fiscal policy. Then you have what is known as the contractionary, approach to fiscal policy. Now here what you do is that now maybe the government sees that the rate at which the economy is running, it needs to be a little bit controlled. So, and shout out to this MP, who is this one? Is it Toby Aupindi? Yeah, Toby Aupindi, I think, submitted in Parliament, was it yesterday, that somehow as a country we need to prepare for these oil and gas industries that are emerging. And that is actually how you project your economy and prepare for the industries that are coming, so that you don't do wrong, planning. Now, when people are talking about education, so a lot of factors that are there, they have to do with sometimes poor planning and that people were not prepared. So you look at, some people are talking about there's no database. Some are talking about people went to Zimbabwe to study for only one subject. People are talking about universities are offering this course is now too much. It's because we were never prepared. So that is one of the things that you do, that you sort of, with your contractionary fiscal policy, you sort of, limit the economy so that you plan accordingly. Otherwise, if you just run thinking that you need certain activities, then at the end of the day, it would actually be a problem in the future. And that is what is happening with education now. I remember when I was doing my undergraduate, is that this lecturer, I think it was for curriculum development and planning, we always come across document that says Namibia is, junior primary teachers are in demand. And then I was wondering, in demand where? And then I think when I looked at what happened was that some of the people even did in service. So these are people who were employed because they have grade 12. And then I think they were trained as teachers while they are already teaching. You see, and that's how this thing of unemployment, especially in the education sector, came up, is because we don't really do contract in, not contract as in a contract, but we just mean, limit certain activities for future planning and projection. So that is what we felt. But there are also now an approach of such nature to the economy where you feel like we need to protect a certain, sector. You can implement that as well through your fiscal policy. But there's also a, neutral one where the government spending, borrowing, taxes and everything is just, balanced. But in the context of Namibia is that you would need the expansionary one because you need more jobs. The government, there are a lot of ways how you can do it. So the government need to spend in the economy in order for us to achieve that. And spending, we mean like recruit teachers, we mean build new schools, but it would also, because this thing of unemployed teachers, there are a lot of factors that are involved, including just general development of the economy. Because some of these teachers, if they are not getting jobs as teachers, they can if there are a lot of job opportunity in the economy, they can actually work somewhere else, which is not a case now because all the sectors, there are no job opportunity. All these things, they are reflective of our fiscal, policies. And then monetary policy sometimes really, especially in the private sector, has to do with now you maybe you have 10 teachers there, and then they wanna get a loan so that they build their school and have a private school. Again, it will be very difficult for them to get money as a starting up capital, because when you go to financial institution to go and borrow, due to our monetary policy that we have in place, it becomes very difficult for you to get there because the requirements will just be a lot. Yeah, that is I don't really want to go into detail. I think I will get time to explain each, but what I was trying to explain is that the issue of unemployed teachers, it is a multifaceted issue. There is a lot of issues around it, and part of them is now our country's fiscal policy, which now deals with how you collect taxes, how you manage taxes, and how you deal with borrowings, because the government can collect money and then inject that money into the economy. The government can as well collect taxes from individuals and corporations and invest that money into employment related programs. Okay, and then the other one is now the monetary policy, to say that now, especially from a private sector point of view as well as individuals income, is that but private sector, so to say, our monetary policy does not really allow a lot of individuals to be able to go and borrow money because of how it was designed. There are a lot of collaterals, there are a lot of what. The government does not even avail a lot of money. Like during apartheid, for instance, the apartheid government was very biased towards white people. They were able to get funding and all of that so that they grow the economy, but we don't see that with our monetary policy. And then the last one is now our national budget. When you look into our budget, which is actually partly the implementation of our fiscal policy and monetary policy from a government point of view, is that it does not really do more when it comes to this issue of employment, like in general. Those are the issues, but with time, I think we will one day unpack another aspect of it, especially maybe just employment in general. So today I just wanted us to focus on our fiscal policy, our monetary policy, as well as our budget as being important documents to consider when it comes to economic activities in general and then employment in particular. Let me hear your point and your comment as to what do you think.